In this video, we're going to deploy vCluster auto nodes using Proxmox, Terraform, and Karpenter. We've done a couple of videos previously on the auto nodes features, but it's been in the cloud so far. And what about if you want to do it on-prem, right? Like if you're using Proxmox or something like that for a home lab, or if you're using it in production, this video is for you, right? Like, so check this out. What we're going to do is go over a couple of things that you need to configure, how to get everything set up, and then how to deploy vCluster auto nodes to go ahead and scale your nodes based on your workload. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so everything starts with the main.tf. I've got a couple of configuration options in the main.tf that we're going to go over. And if you want access to this file, check the description. We're going to have information about where you can get the file and then also links to the docs. So what we start out with is our required provider, which is going to be Proxmox. This is a main.tf, kind of like what you're normally used to using if you've actually interacted with Proxmox and Terraform or Terraform with anything. We're going to use BPG Proxmox in the latest version. After that, we're going to set our provider as Proxmox, and we're going to set our endpoint. We're using environment variables for this. There's another option where you can use variables just without environment variables and set the values to where you can access them in Terraform. That's going to be coming out with the next release. But for right now, I'm just going to show you how to do environment variables. And then the next video, we're going to build on top of this and actually show you how to do it with the values from variables instead. So I set my endpoint. I set insecure equals true because I don't have a real cert. I've got SSH agent set to true too because I'm setting the SSH username and password with my environment variables. And then next, I've created this random string so that I've got this number that I can add to my virtual machine so I can name them different things. That way they don't have the same name. Plus the host name will pull information from that too. All right, after that, I need user data. And to do user data with this provider, I need to create a snippet and I need to tell it where the data store ID is and the node name. So if you notice, my node name is PVE2 instead of just PVE. It's because I got multiple Proxmox configurations set up, and I just named this one PVE2 so I can remember which one it is. But for you, it's probably just going to be PVE. You need to go in and enable snippets. I'll put that information in the description about like what command that you can run to do that. All right, and then once we've defined our user data, what we're going to do is we're going to send data into it, and we're going to say the source is raw. So this is just a cloud config that you're used to. We're going to set up our host name. We're going to use the metadata name from the vCluster node claim so that we can actually have information about it. I'm going to set the password not to expire, and I'm going to set up a user for Ubuntu, and the password is Ubuntu, and set password off to true. For production, you're going to use SSH keys, so ignore this unless you just want to test around and mess with it. I just wanted to be able to SSH in or console in and see what was going on in case I need to troubleshoot something. And then what we're going to do is we're going to replace some of the user data with the cloud configuration information, and then we're going to save that data to this file name, which is going to be in the snippet section in Proxmox. All right, after that, what we're going to do is create a resource for our virtual machine. We're going to use our name where it's going to be vCluster dash the node claim and then the random string. And then we're going to make sure that we're using, PVE2. But like I said, on yours, you're probably just going to be using PVE. And then we're going to tell it where the user data information is, which is going to be the ID of that file that we create. We're going to create multiple ones of these if we're creating multiple virtual machines. So there's going to be a file for each virtual machine. That way we don't read the same host name every time and run into issues where it's trying to join the node, but it's got the same host name and it messes up. And then for my IP configuration, I'm just using DHCP, but you could set static IP addresses if you wanted to here. I'm just pulling an IP address from my network because I'm going to be creating a bunch of VMs and deleting them like nonstop. And then what we're going to do is set our CPU cores. So we're going to use the vCluster value from our node type. So we'll get into node types in a minute, but basically we can set how many CPUs we want per node type. Think of it as like a flavor or something like that in OpenStack where you're like, okay, I want this many CPUs and I want this much memory. And then we're going to make sure that the type is host. And then we're going to do the same thing for memory. If you notice, I've got a trim here because in the node configuration, where I actually configure like the information for this, it gives me an option to set, megabytes, and it's going to add an M to it. So I just need to remove that M because this provider just expects a number. And then I'm going to go to the disk and I'm going to set the data store ID, which is going to be local LVM. Usually you're doing, some stuff in local, but then local LVM is where you're going to launch your VMs. Before I configured this, I actually downloaded and then uploaded the latest Ubuntu server image. You're going to want to do the same. You're going to want to download it and then upload it to local and then define where that information is. That way it can come up, it'll launch, it'll use that cloud config, and then it'll get configured just like it's basically like a cloud image. So we're not using like templates or anything like that. We're just using the cloud image, and then we're using cloud init to configure it. And then I've set the size as 120 gigs. You can set that to whatever you want. And then for the network device, I've just said bridge, VM bridge 0, right? So that's basically the Terraform configuration. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Okay, since we're using environment variables instead of using just regular variables in Terraform, what's going to happen is when it runs Terraform, it's going to pass these values. So what we need to do is set those up in Kubernetes to where our virtual cluster can access them. So we're going to start with kubectx, make sure we're on the right Kubernetes cluster. We're on default. And then we're going to create a secret. and we're going to name it Proxmox credentials, and then we're going to pass it a couple of values: Proxmox VE username, password, SSH username, SSH password. And then what we need to do is label that with the same name as the provider that we create, which we'll create that in a moment, but we're going to call it Proxmox. So label the secret Proxmox credentials in the correct namespace vCluster platform with provider equals Proxmox. And then from there, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go ahead and we will set stuff up. Okay, so one of the prerequisites we have is that you have vCluster platform installed. Information on how to do that and use your free trial, and all that information is going to be in the description. So I'm going to assume you already have it installed. So we're going to start from there. All right, so what we need to do next is to go into vCluster platform. We're going to go to the infrastructure section, and we're going to go to nodes, and we're going to add a node provider, and we're going to use Terraform, right? So we're going to name it Proxmox, and then if you look in the description, you'll find the GitHub repository we're going to use. We're not going to use anything for the environment. We're just going to set up the Terraform node providers. We're going to use the GitHub URL. We're going to select node, which is the subfolder where I've got this configuration set up. And then what we can do is we can actually test it out. So we're going to test it, and then we're going to run a test on the templates to make sure that everything's configured correctly. And then after that, what we need to do is add node types. So this is where we're going to add like our flavors kind of. So I'm going to create a node type called medium. And then I'm going to say max node count of 5 so that I don't create like 100 of these on accident. And then I'm going to give it 4 CPUs, and I'm going to give it 8 gigs of memory. And I'm going to select megs here, remember, because I'm taking the M off of the end. And then what I can do is save that. So I'll hit done. And I'm going to create one more node type because maybe we have something that's going to be larger than that, and I need to fulfill that request. Not in this demo, but in a future demo. So we're going to create one called large. We're going to say max node count 5. We're going to give it 4 CPUs, and we're going to give it 16 gigs of memory, right? Because I might need that later on. The more node types I can create, the better it's going to right size based on what my workloads request. All right, so we'll save that. And then what we can do is we can create an actual virtual cluster at this point. So go ahead over to the virtual cluster section, and we're going to create a virtual cluster. All right, so we're going to name it demo, and then we're going to change the version to a newer version 2.9.1. And then we're going to go to private nodes to make sure we're using private nodes instead of shared. We're going to add our node pool. I'm just going to call it my node pool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select that provider that we just created, which is Proxmox. And then we're going to create the virtual machine, right? But what that's going to do is bring up the load balancer, and it's going to set some of these configuration values. So create the virtual machine. And then I've sped a little bit of this up. What it's going to do now is it's going to go request a node. So if you take a look at Proxmox, we'll see a virtual machine come up. Here it is. We can take a look at it. We can see that it's got 8 gigs of memory and 4 CPUs. And then what we can do is we can take a look at local, and we can see the snippets that were created. This is where the cloud config information is. And then we go here and we look at the disks. So we got the disk configured, we got everything set up, the virtual machine is coming up, and then what it needs to do next is check in. So we'll go ahead to the command line, and we're gonna go ahead and connect to the virtual cluster while it's coming up. So go ahead and vCluster connect demo, and then from here what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we will get the context again just to make sure that we're using the right cluster, which we are vCluster, and then we're gonna get nodes, right? So right now there's no nodes, but then the nodes will come up pretty quick, right? So we're adding that first node to run the virtual cluster itself. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna deploy NGINX. So we've got an NGINX configuration deployment with 3 replicas. We're going to have anti-affinity, so it'll run on each different nodes. And then we're going to have CPUs too, right? If we did CPUs, 4 here, or if we did 8, it wouldn't run because we wouldn't have a node. But 4 would mean, we can run anywhere, but we're just doing 2. We use the anti-affinity to make sure that we're creating those additional nodes for it to run on. So let's go ahead and create that. We get the pods. We see that, one's creating, but the other 2 don't have anywhere to run, right? So it's going to add new nodes. So here's the 2 nodes that it's adding in. It's going to do the same thing it did with the first node. And then what it'll do is it'll go into a state saying, hey, I'm going to add some nodes. So we got to do is we got to wait for these nodes to come up, but we can take a look at the logs here and see what's happening. Basically, you're going to get a lot of Karpenter stuff saying, hey, waiting for the node to check in. And eventually it'll check in and it'll get added. See, we got our first node getting added here, and then it's ready. And then we're going to have our second node come up, and then that's going to be ready too. And then at that point, what it's going to do is it's going to let us run those workloads that we created. So if we get the pods, they're all running, right? Now, what happens if we delete the deployment? If we delete the deployment, what that's going to do is scale stuff down for us, right? But let's go ahead and check and make sure everything's running here. All right, so look, we check here. We've got all our pods running. We go over to our nodes, and then we'll see that we've got those 3 nodes. But, maybe we want to clean stuff up. So what we'll do is we'll head back over to the command line, and then instead of just leaving these nodes running, what we'll do is we will delete the NGINX deployment. And what that's going to do is it's going to trigger, hey, I don't need these nodes anymore because I've only got a single pod running that only needs 1 node. And then what's going to happen is it's going to scale them down. So right now they haven't scaled down, but we'll go back over here and we'll check it out. And it's going to go into a information state, right? Yellow state to say, hey, we're terminating these things. And then it's going to start deleting them, right? So if we look at the logs here in Proxmox itself, then we'll see a destroy and then an erase data. And then eventually we'll get down to a single node that's running that, basically the vCluster components and stuff. So back down to 1 node, take a look at it. There's our single node. And it's pretty much the demo, right? Like that's the demo, is to be able to create a bunch of nodes, delete a bunch of nodes, but make it based on our workloads. So let's go ahead and like disconnect real quick, and then we'll kind of show information about the node claim. So it's actually a CRD called a node claim, right? We've got a single node claim for Proxmox Medium, and that's running our virtual cluster components. So I went by a little bit quick, right? Like, and you know, maybe you had questions that you want to ask, or you want to like interact in real time. Well, should be doing a live stream of this here soon. Like if you're watching this much later at a much later date, there should be a link in the description about, you know, where to watch the live stream so I can kind of demo this. But there's also, you know, weekly demos that we do. So if you check the description again, there is going to be information about the weekly demo. Join there. Let me know what you want to see. Like if you want to see me demo this again, like I'll demo it and then I'll answer some questions. Always glad to hang out Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Just let me know, right? If you have any questions, post them in the comments, you know, like the video, tell me what you want to see next. Should be creating another version of this using variables instead of the environment variables, which will be a little bit easier to configure and set up. That way you don't have to put the host name or anything like that. You can just pull that data from somewhere else, which is more of the way you want to do a Terraform anyways, right? But this is a quick start guide on how you can get started, right? Go sign up for vCluster platform, give it a try. We got some cool updates coming around that too, where you'll be able to, you know, mess around with this a little bit more. Stay tuned. You'll hear more information about that soon. And hopefully a bunch of y'all stop by the booth at KubeCon this year and ask questions there. Let us know, you know, where you found our stuff, right? Like you find us on YouTube, you find us on, you know, Twitter, LinkedIn, or any of these other places. And, you know, come ask us some questions, right? Always happy to hang out and talk to the community. But thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.